So let me give you an example of what I mean. In the Coalition of Western States, we are a group of legislators, grassroots activists, even some lawyers, and yes, there are some good ones. They're kind of like a platypus, though, a little bit. You see one, you're like, wow, never seen one of those before. Looks odd. So we banded together across the West, from Arizona all the way up here to Washington, because we understood that a lot of the legislation and a lot of these attacks that are coming from the left are crossing state borders. They're seeing exactly the same things that we are. Exactly the same language, exactly the same techniques of dismissal and marginalization, exactly the same techniques of disinformation. We're seeing these, so we said, well, why don't we band together and we can work across state borders, not only sharing legislation and ideas and how we fought and won, but also, if there's a crisis somewhere, we can band together and do something about it. And that first occurred, now our coalition formed after the Bundy Ranch. We figured, it was that time because there was this open confrontation where literally you had federal agents who had been given the order to fire on American citizens. That order had been given. And if you watch Dennis Michael Lynch's movie, he talks about that. That's modern America. No arrest warrants. No arrest warrants. And yet, sniper rifles are being pointed at American citizens. How come those guys haven't been prosecuted?
Yeah, exactly.
And here, this is very important. We have to reclaim in our minds what freedom really is. The government should be afraid of the people, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And the fact that they pointed sniper rifles at women and children too, told us we need to form this coalition. This is it. We've got to intentionally work across state borders. So after that, it was a couple of years, well, it was about a year and a half later, we get a phone call from far north Idaho, right? This can never happen here, right? Never happen here. Get a phone call from Representative Heather Scott, who's one of, if not the best legislator in all the state of Idaho. She really is. She says, Matt, we got a problem. I think it was, we have a situation. And I said, well, what's going on? Well, look, the American Legion called me from up here at Priest River, and they said, we got this veteran, Mr. Arnold, served his country honorably, but he had a stroke here a few months ago, and he was in the hospital. And when he left the hospital, he signed a form. Based on that, he got a letter in the mail 3 months later that said he could no longer keep and bear arms or have any ammunition. Wait a minute, you skipped through some things. There was due process, right? They had a hearing. No. They didn't have a hearing? No. Did they give him any notice prior to this? No. They tell him anything? They give him a chance to go get reevaluated by them? No. You're kidding me. No. Well, what are they going to do? Well, they just made a phone call and said they're coming to his house to do an inspection. Wow. This is America, folks. Hopefully not America with a K, if you guys remember that old TV show. I couldn't believe it. So we decided, all right, we want to make sure that the Veterans Administration is going to be warmly welcomed at Mr. Arnold's house with 100 of his best friends in his front yard. So we made a phone call that morning, and 100 people show up at Mr. Arnold's house. The VA didn't show up, but they sent the service officer, the VSO, to show up there. So we had a great conversation in front of TV cameras. Everybody shook his hand. Do you mind if we meet outside and not at Mr. Arnold's house? Absolutely. Are we going to meet anywhere else? I mean, who got that idea, right? So we meet with him, and lo and behold, 2 days later, Mr. Arnold gets a note from his doctor, you've had a remarkable recovery. Wow, whoops, sorry about that. Now, what Representative Scott told me later, actually it was just a few days ago I learned this, that apparently the person that had made that decision left under interesting circumstances and has not been seen since in the Veterans Administration. But look, this happened in America, and it was because we stood on somebody's front lawn and said, yeah, you're going to have to come through us when you take our neighbors' guns. They suddenly backed off. And that was a coalition of Western states that did that. And hopefully it emboldens people around the country, because if we had not been there, oh, they would not have done that, would they? If we had not been there and put that spotlight, they would never have done that. They would have kept going, and one more person would have voluntarily given up their rights. Because government can't take them away. Because our rights are from God, right?
That's right.
They're from God. So we have to voluntarily give them away. That brings us to Oregon. So get a phone call. There's some folks occupying the Mahler Refuge after the protest. Now, the coalition, we hadn't weighed in, but at that point, the national spotlight was on it, and we wanted to make sure two things happened. One, that the message that this so-called public land should be controlled by the states got out there. The second thing is we didn't want to see anybody hurt. And I've talked about this publicly on the radio show and some other things, but I'm going to tell you the story real quick. Folks, that wasn't public land. The media keeps lying about this. It's just like, Clive Bundy had to pay grazing fees. He's a freeloader, and it's coming from all the Bernie supporters. I found that bridge. There, you can laugh at that, yeah. Really? He didn't have to pay those. He had a water right, a preemptive adjudicated water right, and then a corresponding right for his cattle to graze within a half mile of that water right. You don't need to pay grazing fees for that. He asked permission to use his own property right. Well, down in Oregon, that wasn't public land. It was 120 plus private ranches that were destroyed to make that refuge. You hear that in the media? No. Oh, it's public land and you guys want to seize public land. You just seized 120 ranches. It's upside down. That's disinformation right there. We need to get out there and say, no, that wasn't public land. That was private land. And then the question becomes, how did that happen? And it happened very gradually over a period of years because people didn't stand up and say no. And band together in enough time to say no. And yeah, it's scary. Losing your land, losing the ability to use your land is scary. But if you don't stop it, when it happens with your neighbor, it's coming to you eventually. Can we agree on that?
Yeah.
So, we got a phone call one evening. And I picked the phone up and I heard a very sad voice on their side that Lavoie Finicum had been killed. And the next thing they said is, there is a convoy of armored vehicles coming down from the Burns airport. And I said, what do you mean? Because I mean, for an old armor guy, old cavalry guy, that is a very specific meaning. An armored column. What is it? Well, legitimately, MRAPs, Bearcats. And folks, I want to stop right there. This is exactly why local law enforcement should not have that, because we shouldn't have armored columns marching down streets in America. I don't care, because we're being recorded. I don't care what the excuse is for that. That's not America.
That's right.
It is not America. Again, government should be afraid of the people, not the other way around. Bureaucrats should be terrified to go to work every day that somebody is going to come in there and complain. They should be. That's freedom. So this armored column is coming down, and they said, Matt, you got to step in. They're going to go kill them all. And I honestly believe that that is exactly what would have happened. I mean, there's no reason to march an armored column down to a refuge unless your intent is to completely raid that refuge. So I called a good friend of mine in the Oath Keepers, and I said, you got to get me connected with the FBI as soon as you can. And I talked to the FBI on the phone, and I said, You need to stop your armored column if you want this to end peacefully. If that truly is your intention, as you say, because that's the first thing you said, we want this to end peacefully, right? That's what they always say. You need to stop the column. And they did. They stopped the armored column. Now, back up a little bit. 2 weeks earlier, we had been down there, actually several weeks earlier, we'd been down there with several legislators. And I sat in a room with Judge Grasty, the head law enforcement folks, the FBI, and we looked him in the eye. We had this on recording, and I said, is it your intention for this to be end peacefully? Are you going to use any violent action against those folks? Absolutely not. We asked him 3 times to make sure. It's on recording. He said, no, we will use no violent action. So when I get the phone call that they had set up an ambush and that Lavoy Finicum had been killed, they lied and broke their word. Forget all the laws, forget all of the rules and regulations. Man to man, they had lied and broke their word. So we, after that happened, where we stopped the armored column and they agreed to, I sent one of our folks from the coalition in there, Anthony Bosworth, into the refuge. And he got all the people together. They had a meeting, and they said, what should we do? And I said, you guys have brought a lot of national attention to this issue. Great job. Now's the time to go home. And the reason I said that is because at that point, the message was done. They were already taking, we had people up in Congress who were already taking the issue up, doing hearings. So, great job. But the federal government is not going to let you sit in here. So the majority of them agreed, and they left the refuge. There were some holdouts, which left a few weeks later. And the coalition, we sent people down there. Very famously, Michelle Fiore and Franklin Graham went in there, and they negotiated a peaceful settlement to it. But that was because we were organized with the coalition. We had a very clear goal and stated objective, and we were willing to keep on those 2 things, make sure the message is about transfer back to the states, and that everybody gets out of there alive. But why are we even having this discussion in America? And then it comes out. Because of course the FBI puts out a press release. Lavoy Finicum threatened the FBI agents. Looked like he was going to pull a gun. And then all of a sudden another video comes out. A cell phone video synced with the drone video. How many of you have not watched that video? If you haven't, you need to watch that video. There was no arrest warrant for Lavoy Finicum. He rolled his window down. He said, I want to see your identification, which it looked like to me they really refused to do. Then he said, we're going to go to the next county. This is on record. We're going to go to the next county and talk to that sheriff. So he wasn't trying to flee or evade responsibility. He was going to talk to a law enforcement officer, and I'm going to start using this very intentionally, a peace officer, and talk to him. And then he says, we're going. It wasn't like this, all of a sudden he sped off or something. We're going. He takes off down the road. And he drives up, and as he's approaching that roadblock, and by the way, in legal terminology, that is called a dead man's roadblock, okay? It's a very specific legal term. It's a dead man's roadblock, and it's called a dead man's roadblock for a reason. The Washington State Patrol, for example, has a policy on the use of dead man roadblock. You can't use a dead man's roadblock unless it's a fleeing murder suspect, fleeing rapist, kidnapping, and I think it's like a severe assault. Makes sense, okay? Where you have a roadblock around a blind corner that could end up in a car accident. Now, the United States Supreme Court has ruled that the use of a dead man's roadblock is the use of lethal force as a matter of law. It is a Fourth Amendment seizure of your person. Okay? It was the official term they used. So, deadly force. Okay, so the fact that they have a roadblock in the road is a use of deadly force on a man that didn't have an arrest warrant. Okay? Number one. Number two, as he's driving up there, they're shooting at him. So there's a second use of lethal force, again with somebody who doesn't have an arrest warrant, and with women in the vehicle with him, one being a younger woman. Again, I got to question, I'm just going to say it straight out, I got to question the manhood of the people that were sitting there at that roadblock.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, as a soldier, I mean, my goodness, really, in America. So then he gets out and opens the door, takes one step, and you hear another bang, bang. He's shot at again. And this is with his hands in the air. And then the FBI says, oh no, but he was reaching for his gun. Well, I mean, after he shot at him 4 times at least, we're going to get to that here in a second, and you put a dead man's roadblock in his way and he has no arrest warrant out. Really? Again, is this America? Now, I subsequently have done some investigation into this, and there's a couple things that are going on. First, 5 FBI agents right now are under investigation, and they're under investigation for removing evidence from the scene. Okay? What was the evidence you think they might have removed? The brass, spent brass, shell casings. And who turned them in? What was the Oregon State Police, actually, who said there were more brass casings on the ground. So there's evidence that probably were shot at even more times than we understand. And then this. I had a gentleman contact me who was a witness, who, and I'm going to get a sworn statement from this guy. We're working on getting together. But he witnessed 2 to 3 days prior that the ground where that ambush occurred was intentionally being cut. The brush was being cut back, clearing fields of fire. That the road that these guys were hiding on had been plowed out. That means, and by the way, use of a dead man's roadblock is only an exigent circumstance. You don't plan for it. The fact that it looks like they planned it definitely means it is unconstitutional. Again, in America. Premeditated. But that can never happen here. Well, how many of you have been out to Turnbull Wildlife Refuge? So, I have a map that somebody acquired for me that shows the primary, secondary, and tertiary parcels by parcel number that the Department of Fish and Wildlife wants to acquire out of Turnbull over a period of years to turn that into a larger refuge like Mahler. They weighed in. They weighed in on a case where somebody had passed away and there was a personal representative of the estate. The heir didn't know this was going on. Personal representative contacted the DFW, tried to sell the land out from under the heir. And this department wanted to go along with it. And then they wanted to sue over it. And then, strangely, perhaps, our sheriff weighed in on the side of the government. First of all, it's a civil case. What are you doing even weighing in on it? Secondly, why are they doing this to the heir of an estate? Well, because it was one of the parcels that's identified that they needed to acquire. Do you guys understand? They're thinking generationally, these bureaucrats. They think generationally to capture all this land and just tie it up so nobody can ever use it again. And then call it public. That is right here in our backyard. And because of some public outcry and some organization locally, they got back to a few people, they dropped their suit and walked away. That's the power of organizing locally. And many of you didn't even know that that happened. So it did take a lot of people to organize locally to get the ear of the right people and say, no, you're not going to do this in our backyard. I believe there was a concern that there might be 1,000 people that would show up out there. And they were right. There probably would have been. And you know what? They know that if one of us said that, one of our local elected freedom folks would say that, they know we aren't bluffing. They know we aren't bluffing. That is the power of organizing locally. All right, so I want to give you some 2 tools by which to organize locally. I'm going to walk through everything, but I first want to give you the macro picture of the plan. So the Coalition of Western States is the organization of legislators and all these folks. And again, these are servants of you, okay? But we figure we need to be organized with that voice across all these states. So the coalition is kind of up here as far as crossing state lines, but then we have something called the assemblies down at the local level. How many of you have not heard about the assemblies? Wow. 3 or 4? If you haven't, talk to me afterwards. What we are doing is we are forming in every community throughout the western United States an assembly of people. Now, this is a very specific Anglo-Saxon parliamentary term. When the Founding Fathers said peaceably assemble the petition for a redress of grievances, that is actually a parliamentary tool of the people to say, you know what, government, you are not doing what we consented to. We are now going to form and petition for you to stop. And if you don't stop, we're going to work through the electoral process. We're going to get people elected to replace you. We're going to change policies. And this is working everywhere we're using it. Case in point is right here in Spokane Valley, Washington. For 8 years, 8 years, we have had a solid core base of folks here in this area, and they have tried everything to defeat constitutional conservatives. Rob Chase became the first treasurer, what, 54 years? It was a Republican, because we stared him down, were organized enough to get him elected. Rod Higgins, who is now the mayor of the capital of free Washington, as we like to call it affectionately. Rod Higgins is elected now, and they're so scared they're resigning. I mean, what did he do? He just stood for principle. Because we were organized. There are more of us than there are of them. If we turn out to vote and we show up, we win. We win. Now, I'm going to say, though, we have a tendency when we get folks elected like that we then go home. Or we don't show up to the city council meetings. We got to continue to do that. Because if we don't show up to city council meetings, you know, they're going to have a Bernie Sanders rally down there, right? That's what's going to happen. So, Coalition of Western States, assemblies at the local level. Okay?